Hello and welcome. This video specifically we're going to be talking about. It's a part two of the turn on is the way, but we're going to be speaking about yin orientation. So if you didn't catch part one about what vital life force energy, I recommend that you check that out first. It'll make a lot more sense in the arc of this container, this continuum, speaking about the energetic mastery of our vital force energy and how to work with it, in particular inviting yin into the dialogue, which we'll break down and make a little bit more sense of as we go. If you don't know me, my name is Sarah Shepard. I work with Chris and we teach energetic mastery and how to work with erotic energy as a vital force channel of energy. So we've discussed yin yang dispositions in multiple courses and offerings that we've had, but in particular, I feel like both of us keep coming to this place where we recognize that the landscape of the world doesn't quite understand yin. And culturally, we're in a space where we've been conditioned around yang as a priority energy. And then we don't quite understand why we're burnt out all the time, or angry, or dry, or experiencing sort of a flatness or exhaustion as a common theme. So we're going to dig into that a little bit today. Thanks for being here, Chris.
I'm excited. Hi, everyone.
You want
So
to
should we start with yang and yin?
let's give some context. I feel like some people will know this, but I felt like I knew it, and I knew it in the sense of I understood that there's a symbol and it's a yin yang symbol and one's black and one's white, and then I had this like idea of what I thought it was, but I didn't understand it on an embodied sense. And so let's like give some context to everybody on that, and I'll let you just go for it.
Yeah. Yang. So these are kind of twin polarities of life. These are sort of how we get sort of the battery going, if you like. So so both are important and both are good, but when, as you're saying, one has been radically overemphasized to the detriment of the other, then we end up with a significant imbalance, which shows up individually, it shows up relationally, it shows up systemically and collectively all over the place in our world nowadays. And so there's a lot of history here. So to bring yin into the conversation is to invite energies that have been put to the side to have more space, which is just by itself a radical countercultural act of liberation itself. Um, so yang, I would define as external and directive. It is energy that is directive. It has uh, wants to go somewhere. It wants to move. It wants to do. It wants to uh, go in some kind of direction that will have an external orientation. That can be plus, that can be minus, depending on the direction, and depending on how that journey is done. But by itself, that's its movement. It's a neutral movement of life. Yin, by contrast, is receptive rather than directive. And it's really, really crucial to say here that receptive is not passive. This is one of the hugest mistakes and one of the most damning mistakes, really, that is around is that receptive means passive. It does not. It is this fascinating space of an active receptivity. It's not going outwardly and doing, it's a more inward turn and then learning to receive, learning to be in receptivity. And one of the consequences, as you were saying, of that side being diminished is that we lack the ability to receive. We lack nurturance. We're lacking a sense of rejuvenation and restoration and rest. So, yang, for example, is more daytime, and yin is nighttime. And in the northern hemisphere, anyway, yang is summer and yin is winter. So yin is when the land, where the soil is going to start actually going back through to regenerate nitrogen and the nutrients of the soil. And so when yin is uh, diminished because we have our lights on all the time and we're working too many hours and people have their screens on and then they can't sleep well and you name it, then yin is being diminished. And so doing more yang things to try to get rest or sleep or whatever it is inside of a yang system isn't working versus actually getting into yin. So there's a rest side, there's an internal side. And then as it comes to this conversation specifically around turn on and arousal, yin is to be able to receive the fact that like life is electric and to slow down and to go into like a slow, warm burn, like a slow cook kind of way versus yang arousal when it lacks the yin integration. Yang arousal will be spiky. It'll be like it's either kind of on or off, and then it's on and it's really on, and then I need to go do something with it, or then it's depletion. Whereas this kind of like if we build yin arousal, we're just like stoking it, and it's starting to build as just this current of life that we're just emanating and vibing with in our life. So yin is really good for everyone, not doesn't depend on the biological sex or the gender or the sexual orientation or any of that. It's a universal phenomenon for all of us to learn how to get back into that space where like the soil is being fundamentally regenerated and our being feels fertile and rich and fundamentally rejuvenated.
Thank you. Yeah, and thanks for naming that part. It can be an accidental inclination sometimes to assume, well, I'm a man, so I need to be in yang, and I'm a woman, so I need to be in yin, or I'm feminine and therefore I'm inherently like I need to be receptive. And so, in the first video, we spoke about this element of like sovereignty. And in sovereignty and the self responsibility, it's really knowing where you are in your orientation to the disposition of the energies, the yang orientation or the yin orientation. And just in case nobody ever told you this, you can actually float between both. And then, in the symbol, it's like one symbol of yin yang. And I know, and I see this often in our culture, and I get myself caught up in it sometimes too, which is like I am a feminine in a feminine disposition, and I don't want to only have to be in a feminine disposition. And then there's sort of this defensiveness that can show up, which is based in a lot of our cultural conditioning. Just like to remind everybody that we're speaking about it from this place of like the energetics and standing in the awareness of the energetics that are happening at any given moment. So a great example of this is if I ask Chris a question about how he's feeling, the position or the energetic orientation that I'm taking in that moment is the agent, the yang, and I'm requiring him to reflect and go inward simply by me asking him, how are you feeling right now? He needs to look into his inner world to discover that. It's not in the outer world for him to discover that. So little elements of how we can work with this energy and how you already are working with this energy. It's not something you have to learn, that it's already here, except if you're finding that you're experiencing things that are in relationship to Eros in particular, if you're trying to get somewhere or you're trying to get something done, or if you're trying to kind of go through an act to get to an endpoint or a location, then you might be participating in it from a yang disposition. And what we're offering in this is that actually you could just have the intention of staying in connection with nowhere to get to. And in fact, that connectivity is just a really beautiful experience, but it might not be something that you're familiar with. It might not be something that you've ever been comfortable with. And so slowing down into it is a little bit of a pacing. So maybe I'll just talk about some of like I'll just reiterate what you said essentially from the points of like yang orientation, which is dominant in our culture. It's fast, it's peak experience chasing It's stimulation driven. It has cycles of hot, cold, as opposed to like warming and cooling, elements of yin yang, sorry, yang, yin in that respectively. There's an intensity and a crash and a numbness repeat pattern that shows up. It often looks like hustle, push, adrenaline, urgency. And you might have, you might hear expressions, like, we're going to get it. Let's go. Let's get it. Spike it, chase it, don't lose it, like elements of that. Nothing wrong with it, but it is a part of the yang orientation. And the yin orientation is more restorative. I love that we talk about soil a lot about this and like nurturing the elements of soil. It's slow, it's smooth. Try to imagine like the sweetness of smooth or the sweetness of curvatures. That is inherently a yin. There's a gradualness to it. There's a sensation. It has an accumulative nature to it. So it's like a slow growing, which makes it, quite sustainable in a really beautiful way. But ultimately, it is also grounded in safety and presence. And it's more of a cultivation. It's more of it's an experience that you're cultivating as opposed to something that you're getting to. Anything else that you want to add to that? And then we can kind of talk about some of like the elements of the dark side of the moon.
Yeah. I think part of the yin is, again, recognizing that Eros is a force of existence. You know, watch a bee be pulled to the pollen, in a flower, watch the or smell the scent of someone and you go, mmm. And their scent or their perfume is like a whole world unto itself. Like there's a whole mystery of a being that all of a sudden you're just like, whoa, what is that? That's interesting. Or food. You can just even take your senses, and a yang way is like looking out. I'm looking out. I'm seeking, I'm searching, I'm focusing, I'm investigating, and my eyes are in a direction. They have an agency, they have an agenda. Or I could let my eyes go wide and I could just go like, wow, look at all that, and let the color come to my eyes, right? I'm not seeking it out. I'm like all of a sudden it's like, wow, there's beauty like everywhere. There's mystery and there's evocative possibility just all over the place. And this is where we say like receptivity is an active disposition of letting be, letting things come to us, receiving, actually metabolizing it. So we start to do that, we start to recognize there's beauty everywhere, there's creativity everywhere, and as well as there's like this current of life, that's everywhere that makes, the birds and the bees and makes things delicious and yummy and existing.
I love that analogy for receiving, the landscape or receiving. The diffuse wide lens is a really great way of looking at it. This is a wide lens perspective where you're able to not be hunting or seeking for something, but actually be in a space where you're letting it all in. There's an inherent widening nature to yin or feminine that we speak about quite a bit. Um, so if that's not something that you feel is a big part of your life, then I just want to underscore this part of like, it's not that you're broken. It's just that you've been taught that there's one room in your house and it's the one with the lights on, and we don't go down into the basement. We don't go into those kind of other parts. So much so that you forget that they're there. You might not even know that you can access them and that they might have treasure troves of really valuable um, experience within them. So when we live in a world where our nervous systems are overstimulated and our soil or our being is under resourced, there is a tendency for the body to start to express burnout, numbness, anxiety. Functional freeze is a real common one in this space of this conversation, and a disconnection from pleasure and presence. Functional freeze can show up as a result of living in a life where our sensations and feelings were denied. So rather than it being like something that's wrong with you and that you're a victim of culture in this way, it can simply be that so far in your journey there has been experiences where that wasn't safe, and that can be transformed, and that there isn't anything wrong with you. It's the space that you're living in. To deepen into the garden metaphor, it's the way that your garden has been tended by the gardener has depleted the soil, but the soil is something that you have control over. And when you start to learn how to build healthy soil, then what ends up happening is you start to grow a lot of fruit bearing plants. You start to grow a lot of fruit bearing experiences in your life. And so through tending to the soil, you ultimately get a lot of production, a lot of like the thing that you're seeking, the thing that you're hunting for. So this is an invitation to kind of come into that model of organizing your energy in a way and slowing down into it. Um, I was sharing with Chris, I watched recently a show about Tai Chi, where an energy master was like put in a position where he was, as a very small man, put up against UFC fighters, Olympic fencers, athletes that were in stature significantly bigger than he was, but also trained to fight. One of them is like the Guinness Book of World Records strongest man in the world, pulled trucks and planes and like all of these things. And they were put together energetically to test who was the better master of strength. And of course, you can imagine where this is going. The Tai Chi master was like, well, all I needed to do was I needed to receive their energy. And then as it gathered, I could use it and I could push it back at them. So it was like, I'll take their strength, I'll channel it through my body, and then I'll offer it back to them in a way that they didn't, it was so destabilizing to them. So I was just, sharing that there's this place of collecting the energy. And that can be helpful to understand, is rather than rushing out and seeking for it, it's a drawing it into ourselves and allowing it to collect and to build and get to a point where there's a threshold where it just starts to bubble and spill in this like really beautiful way. I think spill is actually probably not the best word for it, but it begins to overflow in this magnificent way. um, the the release becomes something that's like a cyclical nature of it, as opposed to something that's chased, right? So it's like the same thing as like the plant blossoms or bears fruit, not because it's told it needs to blossom or bear fruit, but because it's so nourished, it starts to become this blooming expression. So yeah, this is this several thousand-year-old philosophy of practicing softness instead of force. And it's really important to understand that that's one of the elements of this work and the way that we're teaching it, as well as it might feel like something that you don't have a lot of exposure to in your life.
That's the dark side of the moon,
Yeah,
an image there.
yeah,
And the moon is often, not always, but not always historically, but usually assumed like La Luna, usually considered feminine or yin. But then, so it's one thing to then talk about even the moon or lunar energies in that way. But then there's the dark side of the moon. The part of the, if the moon is for most people kind of symbolic of the subconscious or the body conscious or some of the unconscious, then you have like the dark side of the moon is the unconscious of the unconscious. And so what we're talking about here is then this idea of yin, you start to see its implications certainly in the realm of sexuality and eros that we're focused on here, but you can see them politically, economically, how there's child raising, education, money. We could go all down the line. It's a systemic and total collective kind of thing where the yang has been so overemphasized and the soil is depleted, literally, in the cases of the earth, as well as figuratively in people's microbiomes and their own kind of inner soil. And so, a lot what we noticed, one of the things you mentioned was movements that are claiming to be about the empowerment of yin, or often labeled as feminine or women specifically, though again, not all women are yin, and not all yins are women, um, but nevertheless, like how often a lot of them are doing it only from the side of the moon that's reflecting the sun. So it's basically still a yang oriented way of trying to do, whether it's called female empowerment or women's sexual empowerment or all this stuff, which is important, obviously, and very crucial. But what we're trying to say is like the dark side of the moon, the yin orientation to yin and to turn on is the thing that's like, the old like there's things that we know that we don't know, and then there's things that we don't know that we don't know. And the we don't know that we don't know tends to be yin, not as the extra add-on, not that we're still doing yang primarily, and now we're going to add some yin in because we recognize it's a little imbalanced. So we think balance is going to be just to add a little more yin in, but actually say, no, no, put the yin first and actually change the whole trajectory, and then have the yang take a little break and then eventually be reintegrated inside of a space that has been leaning towards the yin. That's the actual kind of revolution or overhaul that we're talking about.
Yeah, thanks for that part. And that just to understand that the moon influences and is a great analogy for the somatic sensations of the body, or the information that comes from the bottom up instead of the top down. A lot of the therapeutic model is like we'll talk our way into a solution. We're going to talk, we're going to come up with a plan, and we're going to, it's this yang everywhere. So you might not recognize, you don't know what you don't know. You might not recognize some of the personal inner patriarch that is showing up in a feminine expression. It's something I'm sifting through and learning about all of the time, my own inner patriarch that's here, as opposed to projecting it out into the outer world of the masculine. I have an inner patriarch through my own conditioning in the dark side of my moon, so to speak, that places where there is a not knowing what's in there, the place that I just don't quite understand. And so this can show up in a not trust in a process of life where boss babe, or, the place of expression where safety will come from me being able to do everything myself, me being able to experience all of the layers of resourcing for myself. And I certainly, as a woman who does resource herself, is not saying that that does not need to be there, but regardless of what your anatomy is, to be able to understand the nature of yin and the restorative elements of yin, and to have a celebration of what it means to be able to be in that experience of inherent value. If you didn't catch the first one, as I spoke to, we talk quite a bit about the elements of this being your birthright to have this experience, and that if we've only been shown one half of the journey, the other half of the journey you might not know is even there. So this is a turn on that feels smooth. It's slowed down. It's an emanating heat. It's subtle, but it's undeniable. Everybody can feel that it's there, even though it doesn't have a performative expression to it. I feel like, as a woman who's deconditioning performative sexuality, that's something that I thought was what sexuality was, or what sensuality was. And so moving into this quiet expression of magnetism, or this quiet expression of emanation, has really changed a lot, as well as my body thanks me. I'm quite grateful for, oh, thank goodness we can exhale into this. Um, yeah, I want to move on to another thing, but I'd love for you to just, what else do you want to bring in for the elements of the yin turn on?
That this, what I called earlier, huge error or mistake, that receptive equals passive. I could add another piece there, which is like receptive equals passive, passive equals weak. And so that's the huge set of errors that happen as a consequence of misunderstanding that receptivity has immense power associated with it. It's a unique kind of power, a power that is often on the dark side of the moon that most people don't even see or are aware of. But yin is not yin is not weak. It's not passive, it's not powerless. It's a different form of power and agency. And it's one that we all would do well to cultivate, and particularly say in a individuals who want to be in a relational configuration, they may like to lean into that space a little bit more often than not, erotically and sexually. And that's fine if so, or they might like to, have a little bit of this time this way and this time the other way, or they tend to prefer one or the other. But that's kind of a second order thing. The first order thing that I think we're really trying to say is that this form of turn on is actually for everybody to get going in their being. And then that would create immense levels of more resource, draw, magnetism, the environment, the sense of the space that we're in would be in life for much more of us like just way warmer. And as we talked about in the last one, creates far more intimacy with ourselves, with each other, and any all different kinds of intimacies. It doesn't just have to be sexual, although that's definitely one of the ways that it can show up. But that is one option. But just with the loneliness epidemic, so-called, is really like a craving for connection. It's really a craving for intimacy. And so long as yin is not going to be part of that equation, and then it's like, well, here's how we fix the loneliness problem. Here's how we're going to create more connection. Step one, step two, here's how we do it. Here's how you be more, get out there with your communication, get out there more and talk to more people and whatever. It's like, no, man, we really need to bring in the whole other side of the equation. That's, yeah.
Yeah, it's so true. Is like that place of like you can be in a crowd of people, and if you're disconnected from your yin, you can feel this experience of being completely alone in a crowd. So this notion of being connected to yourself is the first connection that the loneliness could be calling for, is like, where am I in this journey? And you will not find that in the outer world. You will not find that in the yang. You might be recognizing that right now, that you've been looking for it in the yang. And so this is like an important point. And then just to tie it into the erotic or the sensual, there was a space where after a breakup, I decided that I was going to go into a container of celibacy. And about 7 months into it, I was like, wow, I'm so lonely. I like was really in this place of like, I'm not carrying this channel of energy consciously within me. I hadn't gotten to that point yet. And I have now since had the opportunity to grow in this. But in those initial phases of the celibacy, it was a lot of repression. I'm just going to repress this erotic energy. I'm just going to repress this life force. And what we're suggesting is that when the current is available, you're consciously shepherding it, you're in a relationship to the yin elements of it, and they're building, then in that space, you're turned on. And it's like you're not looking for that turn on from somebody else. And it feels like this beautiful aliveness, or this sort of like inner, I don't know, I kind of see like a little bit of an inner candle, or like an inner sort of flame that is like really healthy and burning. And it's not big, it's not a bonfire, it's not so hot that it's burning me in any way, but it's not extinguished either. And so that part of like finding that space where it's, the charge is there and the aliveness is there and it's glowing, but it's like this beautiful soft glow of the inner light, or your inner radiance. And we find our inner radiance by following that light back inside. And it's so helpful to know about these elements, because it just isn't taught to many of us in the Western culture in particular. There's a depletion of this languaging. And certainly there's a, an element of like chasing solution in the outer world as opposed to coming to this space. But also, I'm not talking about the coldness of meditation and just sitting in this kind of staunch, like I'm just going to objectively observe what's in me. I'm speaking about the energetic sensation of aliveness and holding that current and breathing with that current, and then carrying that around with you in your aloneness, in your solitude, in your experience with nature, in your experience with animals, as well as in your experience with people. And it really does start to change your relationship to receiving and being integrated in life as opposed to chasing life.
Amen. Preach. That was beautiful.
Thanks. Yeah. We'll talk more about it in other videos, but we'll tell you about the fire water and like carrying your fire water and the skill set of, it comes from Tantra. We're going to reframe it and kind of bring it into like a little bit more of a modern context. But yeah, like that feeling and the fire together in the body. Yeah. Yeah. So warming up to life, maybe we can go a little bit into this element of yin orientation is not chasing, it's living in an experience where we're 70 to 80% kind of warmed up and just warm and moving around and in our warmth. Um, Gives you access to a steady, available energy. There's not these crashes. And because of being inhabited within self, there's presence, right? When you're like looking for presence, you need to be the one that is inhabiting the presence. Like we spoke about in the last video, ensoulment and that element. I feel like this is something that, yeah, I would love for you to expand on.
I know in my own conditioning, which was really repressive in my upbringing relative to eros and sexuality, the primary message I got was repression, or only within these certain parameters and only under these conditions, and only then is it okay. And even then, it's not kind of okay. It's like sort of passable. We'll allow it, but it's not really like good or healthy or anything. And certainly anything outside of these very constrictive, in my case, it was religiously indoctrinated variations. It's inherently sinful and bad and wrong. So that's the primary message I got in my sort of religious training. And then in kind of the secular world, incorporation, whether movies and, music and TV shows and culture and everybody else and whatever, it was if I get turned on, then I'm supposed to go do something with it and make it go away and get it. And like it's like, okay, now's the moment. And then this whole big thing of like, and is she also turned on? Okay, now we gotta go do this thing. And both of those, either the repression model or the unconscious expression model, is not sovereign, number one. It's not rooted in wholeness or goodness. And number two, it didn't take into account yin. So nobody ever taught me how to be, how to incorporate my own yin, number one, but also if I wanted to be, as I tend to, as term my orientation, wanted to be with the yin, like how to do so in a way that actually begins to understand there's a whole different flow there. There's a whole different vibrancy. There's a whole different arc of what arousal means. And the experience certainly of others being unconscious and then those on the receiving end feeling like they either, as you said, had to perform or they pretend or they got to say they have a headache or whatever it is and excuse making to get out of it, but have a legitimate excuse and have to caretake the other person's ego and all of that and all the feelings of rejection and misunderstanding and pain that are there in people's experience. We could start fresh. We could start from scratch here and realize that all of those symptoms are symptoms of an underlying cause. And the cause is the missing half of the equation. And if that's put front and center, then a whole different set of possibilities, as you're saying, come to be for everybody individually, the sort of erotic relationship of life, and then also certainly within specific relationships themselves.
The thing that we didn't discuss that we're going to talk about in this that I just feel like I need to bring forward is this realization that I had when I started carrying my yin orientation. I started to understand my desires better. And I was able to get like really clear on what desires that I had that were culturally conditioned desires. This is, makes you a good person. This is like something that you're allowed to have these desires, but you're not allowed to have these desires. And so then those desires go into repression, and that actually becomes like a repressive life force, as opposed to recognizing, oh, there's a desire here and it's being illuminated and it can move and it doesn't need to be something that's acted on. So sort of that sense of like, get this desire out of me because it's a bad desire and like I can't tell anybody about it, or what does it mean if I have it? It makes me, whatever kind of thought process that came up. So it leads to this personal intimacy experience where you become more safe to yourself when you understand your yin energy in this way, when you're illuminated from within and you're used to carrying that elements of what desires show up can be something that is just like, oh, that's really inherently me, as opposed to something that I need to do in order to get this cultural check mark of like, you have value because you did the thing. And again, you see this kind of element of like personal trust that starts to show up, as well as a trust in life of like, yeah, I can have this desire, and this desire can be this magnetic thing that is leading me in life, as opposed to me abandoning myself, jumping out to go and prove it to the world or to prove that I am deserving of existing in some way. It becomes a magnetic co-creative flame is what I keep finding. Is like the more I hold my desire body as something that I'm responsible for, then it clarifies that legible signal that I was talking about. When we know our desires and we know our desire being, then we also find that we magnetize people to us that have similar desires. So this is a wonderful way to start to attract and work with people that have co-creative parallels. So we have these like mini interdependent ecosystems within our world where we find our people. I hear this so often where people are like, where are my people? And it's like, well, are you clear on yourself? Are you clear? And is your battery restored and running from that space of a clear signal that you're sending out into the world? Or is that something that is still like longing to be clarified in some way? And again, I spoke to this a little bit in the other video. It's like you can have a desire one day and it'll refine itself the next day and refine itself the next day. And so to not get so stuck on it, and that is a yin nature, is to trust that it's like it isn't necessarily just the first part that shows up, that there's a process, there's a season to everything. If you're in a woman's body and you're still cycling, or if you were cycling at one point, you know that there's a new experience every day that is related to that. So being in alignment with your yin means that you recognize that there's an arc constantly happening where there's like a rising tide and a what is it called when it goes back? A receding tide,
Waxing and waning. Yeah.
rising and receding, and that there's an element of like coming into that pacing that's related to that. So yin, I found a lot of it being pacing, being an integration with time and space in such a way that you feel like you belong to this relationship of slowness and trust in life. And that when we work from that place in intimacy, when we work or live or are presenced in that space with another person, then every moment just becomes this beautiful emerging, because again, you're not trying to get anywhere. You're just appreciating the human experience from the inside, possibly with another person. So this is really important because it gives us like a clearer kind of sense of our life, a clearer sense of our relationships, a clearer relationship to flow. Our nervous system intelligence just starts to also come into step with this. The nervous system doesn't need to be regulated anymore. It doesn't need to be like, I need to always, feel a certain way. You get to feel exactly how you're feeling because that's what when your yin awareness is there, you're able to be wide in that relationship to what is there. So it's not about efforting, it's not about fixing. There's an inherent curiosity and a slowness. And yeah, I feel like that messaging, even if you just take in this video and recognize where you are relative to your relationship to your yin, and that potentially there's something there for you that is opening up a curiosity. I know that was what it was for me. I was able to get to a place where I was like, well, I can tell that the exhaustion is just going to keep going on in the direction of the exhaustion. So I don't need
Yeah.
to go into the exhaustion to find that out. I could dip a toe in the exhaustion and be, honest enough with myself that I was catching that was starting to show up for me. A lot of women will report this, as well as many men will also report this level of experience. So you can go all the way into that, or you can start to host this question of like, what is it like for me to be in receiving? What is it like for me to have an understanding of what this could be like to be possible? And that's the invitation, is that there's a deeper training available to you that isn't esoteric, and like it's not tantra, and we're not teaching tai chi, and we're not, all of those are magnificent elements of many masters in the world that can offer that, and I recommend them if you want to go in that direction. But what we want to teach people is there's a way of living in relationship with your own yin in this modern life that is really, really a beautiful way of living, and that it's more of a restoration. So, yeah, what else would you say about that?
Mm. I appreciate that you were saying that yin is about flow and momentum. When we're in a yin space, whether it's visually, like we were talking earlier, with the diffuse awareness as opposed to concentrated and focalized awareness, it's when it comes to sensation, all of a sudden, or when it's with it being with another person, all of a sudden, yin is the one that feels like yes, there's me, but I'm also it's a little more lava lampy. I don't know how else to say it. It's like the the strict sense of very separate boundaries. This is over here and that's over here and this is concrete. All of a sudden it's like the space between, particularly when we're coming to the eros laden yin, the space gets turned on. The space around a person, the space between people. Anybody who's ever been in a like environment that's got like nice, sexy vibes, like you can feel it's in the atmosphere. You can feel it's in the walls. It's not just in individual people. It's in the air. You can smell it. You can breathe it in. It's coming in through your pores. You're getting immersed in it. If people are playing music that evokes a very kind of erotic vibe, right? Same kind of thing. It's all of a sudden you're in an environment. And so the yin energy is very much about time and space is just this moment and this process. And as you were saying, therefore, there's no like, okay, now where do we get to the next thing? What's the next step in the sexual candy land? How do I get to the next one? No, enjoy the experience as it is in each moment. That example earlier I was giving of in training of either like repression or now there's turn on, now it needs to go somewhere. And then it's usually too fast and too furious kind of a thing and doesn't last very long. Is like instead it's like that's the beginning. Why didn't somebody ever just teach me like once you get to that place like whoa, there's some fire. Now that's the base level that we're starting with. Not okay, now that needs to go somewhere because it's too intense and I can't handle it and I don't feel containment. So I need to get somewhere else. And maybe there'll be some little bit of pleasure on the way and it'll be really nice and it'll be a climax and then, denouement. And instead, it could be no, it could actually just like start reverberating. Like this could actually be the drumbeat of life to feel that level of vibrancy.
Yeah. Yeah. The Gene Keys and I Ching teaching around the yin, the prime yin being, the name of it originally is the field. So I love that you spoke to kind of that energy of like it's in the environment. It's this field of energy where when it's seated, things are created. When that field of energy gets seated, if it receives consciousness seeded into that field, what happens is creative expansion. But just to be able to feel it first and to be in this space of like, there's me, and then there's the space of my environment and the aroma of that vibration and that element of fully being present in it. And then it is restorative to the body. It'll feel like this exhale to the body where the body systems, hormonal systems, energetic systems, the way the adrenal systems work, they start to organically, they just start to restore themselves. You take the energy out of the, molecules of calories that you've eaten and you put them into your cell and you start to break down like the parts of your body that are already breaking down, they become digested, and then you actually start to restore your youthfulness, not because you're trying to do something to restore your youthfulness, but because your youthfulness starts to emanate and grow out of you as, again, this restoration that I'm always talking about. I feel like I'm banging on constantly about with the body. It's these elements that are yin oriented. So follow the links below. If you're interested in learning more about this, if you're interested in participating in this in a easeful modern way. This isn't, like I was saying, this isn't Eastern. This is like us integrating how this is already happening in your body. And you can find out more in the links to go with this. Anything that you want to add before we close this?
Thank you for talking about the restoration and the vitality and that it comes through in the skin and it comes through in the face and just people's because again, when we're working with yin for any of us, and then eventually if someone is more yang oriented, eros wise or sensuality wise or sexual wise, it's also a good thing for A, for your own restoration, and also B, if you want to be in partnership with someone who's more on the inside, you need to know what you'd actually be dancing with. And that makes it a win-win for everybody. Again, rather than it being this, well, this is for this group of people who are yins, and you have your cultural assumptions of what that's supposed to be, or gender assumptions or something. This is, we all need to be able to enter into this like natural ecstasy. And then from there, then you can play with some more specific polarities, as we'll talk about in the subsequent videos.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm getting this sense, and it's just a projection. I might be totally wrong, but in the kind of polarity world, I'm getting the sense that masculine are like, no, I have to be the yang. I have to be all of this way. And if I'm not, then there's some sort of this, organically, it makes sense to assume that that would be a failure in some way. And more what I would say is like that this continuum works great. The polarity continuum works really well when you know where you are energetically at any time, and then you can move with agility. Then you can kind of go, okay, do you want to go in that end and I'll go in this end? Or do you want to go in the opposite directions? Because we both have the energetic fluency to be able to do that. And it can then correlate with the anatomy in such a way that the anatomy also says yes. And that's so fun. That is just like, I'll just tell you, that is a fun experience to have. That is a good playground. I highly recommend it. Follow the links if you want to know more. Thanks so much, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.